Again, thank you to Tele2 for hosting. It's really wonderful to be here, and also to Simon from Telia and Mariola for the input that they provided to this session as well. We want to make this as interactive as possible. Obviously, fraud prevention, verification, compliance, risk can be quite a dry subject at times. So we want to kind of, have it as interactive but as possible, but to be educational as well. So any questions that you've got, please feel free to ask during the session, and also vice versa. I'll probably interject and actually ask you a few questions as well, maybe along the way. So obviously you've met John before as the CEO of Aegis. So my name is Paul Eccles, so I act as John's VP for Business Development for the international side of the company. Today we're going to be talking about truth, trust, and traceback and what that means. There is knowing me, knowing you. Obviously, we are here in Sweden, but there is a little bit about that from the perspective of what we're actually doing here. Now, up here behind us, you'll see some recognizable brands from different countries across the Nordics, as well as obviously individuals associated with them, from Annika Sorenstam to Ada Hederberg to obviously Mr. Schmeichel to Kimi. What do they all have in common? Can anybody tell me what they all have in common? Oh, winners, that's a very good one, Mariola. Winners is a good one. They're all brands. Each and every one of them is a brand, and they have brand protection rights associated with them all, as do ABBA. Thus the name of the game in knowing me, knowing you. You can't use their music, we can't use their music, we can't use their brand. ABBA are actually one of the best protected companies in the world. They have protected their identity, their copyrights, their images like no other. And they've been very, very successful in that. The purpose of that is the purpose of what verification, what brand protection means to an organization when it engages with consumers, which you've obviously been talking about today from a marketing perspective, from a customer experience perspective, from a sales perspective, from a support perspective. It is about knowing who you're actually dealing with. There used to be something that's WYSIWYG. If anybody remembers that, what you see is what you get. You don't necessarily get what you see and what you think you're getting, because it could be somebody else that you're actually engaging with who you don't realize. As Simon and I were just talking about at lunchtime, from the perspective of contact centers and telemarketing organizations, is it the company that's really contacting you? Who is that person that's on the other side? Or are they a bot? We don't know. But what we have to do is make sure that at the first point of call, we are actually making sure that the company who is being onboarded is the company that they say they are, that the individuals whose names are associated with them and their contact details have the rights to represent that brand and their images. That is the first point of call associated with brand protection from the perspective of business messaging or branded calling or network APIs, whatever services you're actually delivering. Those are the key things. John, you've probably got some thoughts on that from the perspective.
I was just going to reinforce, it's not just about protecting the consumer, it's about protecting the brand and their image, right? Making sure that nobody is falsifying their brand by, using it to engage in bad behavior. So it's definitely a two-sided coin. There's benefit both to the brand that is engaging the channel as well as to our consumers and customers. Some of the things that are very interesting, though, that we've seen with the brands and the logos, though, are things where a logo is actually not a registered logo, which is going to be about 80% of the logos that we see, if not 90%, will be unregistered. So protecting those brand logos and also, though, verifying the rights to use is where it gets tricky in this space. So,
no, absolutely. I'm going to jump on to the next slide. Because again, major brands that you'll see and recognize, and this is where often when we're attending these events, we're talking about them. We're talking about the financial organizations, the consumer scams that are impacting individuals around the world, because these guys are the money. These are the people that are targeted to be able to target you and me predominantly through SMS scams to date. But it's also a starting point for a lot of the drivers that we're all engaged with now around the world to deliver higher levels of consumer protection and higher levels of brand protection. It's not foolproof. And I know that there's various people that will say, you're wrong to say that verification isn't the answer. Verification isn't just an answer, it's part of an ecosystem of a chain of events. Because the reality is, as John has mentioned earlier, brands can change, businesses can change, they can be taken over. I was just saying to, in fact, I was saying to Simon, my partner is a CFO of a trust. She's been complaining the fact that Starling Bank are re-verifying her business. And I had to make the point, well, great that Starling Bank are doing that, because that's their job from a compliance perspective. And whether you're in compliance, risk or fraud prevention controls, these types of actions need to be undertaken by businesses. Aegis play a part in that ecosystem, as do we all. We all gather intelligence, we all gather data. Robert this morning mentioned analytics. Analytics from a consumer perspective, from a marketing perspective is great. We're gathering analytics from a fraud prevention perspective, because it's not just about the behavior of a company and the history of the company that you're actually verifying. The piece is, how does that company behave once it's actually engaged with the market, small or large? Because what's often been a trend is businesses come into the marketplace, but then over time, fraudsters, bad actors, whatever you want to determine as a bad actor, can start misbehaving, and that's when problems can occur. It doesn't necessarily start at day one. Yeah. Something, again, John's got 20 years of experience and examples of.
Well, John has 14 years that he's been running Aegis. The company's been around for 20. But yeah, no, interestingly, though, the thing about banks as well is that these transactions are often involving financial transactions, and regulators and legal matters get even more complex when you're talking about financial transactions occurring, whether it's direct carrier billing or an RCS financial transaction. It really can make things a lot harder on participants if it goes awry. Mm-hmm. But, you know, as we talked about as well, the banks are also in many countries now pushing on regulators to have the telecom companies participate in refunding customers for financial transactions gone bad through telecom channels. I'm not sure it's been successful anywhere yet, but, you know, the banks are definitely pushing very, very hard on regulatory bodies on a global basis to try and really bring the telecom community into paying for some of the fraud that's going on in that space. So it becomes even more important, you know, to make sure that we've got these processes working correctly.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, again, being here in Stockholm, obviously the people that are local here, if you've ever been to the Viking Museum, you might know what their tagline is: where myths meet truth. It's quite apt, really, that we're here today talking about truth and trust and trace back to the actually originating sender of a campaign. Similarly, you go and see the Vasa, the biggest failure ever. But what that says is that if you're going to sell something, make sure that the quality assurance is there, because there was a design fault that saw it kind of just sink straight away. So how you design your business practices, how you design your internal processes are absolutely critical to business success, but also to the market growth. And I think this is the opportunity that RCS for Business brings to everybody here. You've heard from Tim, you've heard from Simeon. You know, there's a lot of work actually ongoing right now internationally associated with the Trusted Sender Program, as an example, where ultimately the aim is to get this minimum standard on an international basis that every country in the world can adopt and accept, that also allows for different countries around the world to actually implement other policies on top of it, driven by their own regulatory or government frameworks, such as in the United States, or whether it's in the UK or Norway or here or Spain or Poland, as an example. So all of these pieces, there is an opportunity now for us to create a really effective onboarding and verification process that allows brands to get into the marketplace quickly, but also through the work and engagement with the likes of industry bodies and the work that Google and Apple are jointly working on as well. And the work now from the Google search piece to scale this, working with carriers and aggregators, there's a real opportunity to see something successful now and to see the revenues grow as markets transition, because otherwise there's only one winner, and Mr. Zuckerberg knows exactly who that is, himself. And the experience that you're going to get with RCS, we all know, is far higher. So I think, you know, that's one of the key things here. But ultimately, with RCS for Business, with the verified sender program, whether it's verified caller from a branded calling perspective, whether it's the verification associated with network APIs. Key, as Simeon was just highlighting in the last session, are the best practices. And on that note, I'm going to let John take you through this because this is a key part of what Aegis do as an organization. And just to give you an appreciation, Aegis have launched RCS across all the carriers in the United States. They'll be doing so in Canada as well. We're live in Europe as well. We're not just a verification authority for this channel. As John has said, we're working across channels. We're also, from a network API perspective, the verification authority for Aduna. So with the operational environment in North America, in Australasia, in Europe, Aegis are truly a global business, which John will just kind of take you through some of the best practices specific to RCS. And please, any questions that you have, if you want to just put your hand up and stop, we'll just interject and answer them for you.
Yeah, please feel free to ask a question at any time. Yeah, it's interesting because working in all these different channels and all these different countries, we're continually having meetings on what will the standards be, for this channel, for this country, for this cross-carrier engagement, for this registry that we're behind. Interestingly, no two implementations for us. Is it me or him?
No, that was me.
Okay. No two implementations anywhere are ever the same for us. So we're always hooking up differently. We're either white labeled behind registries, like the campaign registry is here. We got GCH for short codes. We got Aduna for identity APIs, or we're out in front directly integrated with the aggregators, and they're sending us their brands. We're passing answers directly into the carriers, into their onboarding system so that they can automatically approve. In other instances, we're pulling data off of Google, integrated with Google, and pulling the data from there to do the vetting. There's just no two implementations, unfortunately, that are exactly the same. So what does that mean? It means you have to be agile. It means you have to be able to change your processes to make a market work, quite frankly. But in most instances, we are working for, broad market implementation and getting agreement across the participants on how it has to work. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the details. So the first most important thing is, does the company legally exist, the entity? Do they legally exist in the country that they're from? And number two, are they who they say they are? And so what does this involve? It really involves authoritative data sources. In other words, we're looking through government databases on a global basis to identify that company, to make sure that it legally exists, to make sure it's in good standing. And we're also looking at how old is it, how big is it, because that can have an impact as well. A company that was just created 2 months ago, well, why was it created 2 months ago? Many are for good purpose, but a few are not. The second thing is, are they who they say they are, right? Because we do see a lot, and I mentioned earlier, we see a lot of false registrations over the last 20 years where we've got, some entity trying to say that they're somebody that they're not. That's how they used to get in and commit the fraud, right? Because we're going to trace back to who they said they were. So we have direct verification capabilities as well, and we have many different ways of doing that. But those are the two most important things to be done on the brand itself. Now, in some channels and some markets, we're looking at behavioral history. We're looking at legal, criminal, financial, regulatory, sanctions, watch lists, terrorist lists, right? We're looking at industry. What industry are you operating in? So we can go deep into behavioral history to see if there's anything in the history that would indicate that they're doing, that they might harm consumers. So we're looking for legal matters that are indications that they would harm a consumer. A good example is we had a company come through just a couple of weeks ago that was a very large company, but it was basically a national debt collector. But they had been fined $35 million for illegally collecting money, and another time $25 million by the federal government. And so that's consumer harm. So what are we going to do with that? Do we let them in to do RCS messaging? Or do we not, right? So that was kind of a unique case because it's not phishing, it's not spam, it's not, it's just an interesting thing in their background where clearly they were fined for, not doing the right thing for consumers. They wound up being, let in, but they're on a high watch list. So we're going to be watching their traffic. Yes. Yes, that's Mhm.
I could say, no, we are Tele2, we will never approve this agent because because of this behavior,
Yeah.
because of this. Is that possible, like operator by operator? Can it be differentiated?
Yes, it can. So that's an exact example. That's what we did actually. So we found this behavior for this debt collection company. And, oh, I'm sorry. She's asking, what if one mobile operator in a market doesn't like the behavior and doesn't want that company on their network, but another one might? Can we handle that? And the answer is yes. Sorry, I should repeat. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah,
So
just to add to that, whenever you're designing your own policies associated with how you're going to do your verification, this is this piece about what is an acceptable minimum verification standard for a country, let alone the world that the GSMA, for instance, is working upon. The examples right now would be where cross carriers are engaging and they're actually creating the verification, what is an acceptable brand validation, brand verification process for a country at the moment, as an example. But each individual operator then might have their own internal policies on top of that they will want to have managed. And that is one of those things that where there's an aspect of you need to have a bit of flexibility, but you need to have that common agreement from the perspective of enabling a market to grow and having the right level of friction. You need friction, but you don't need too much friction.
yeah, so we've been operating at volumes for many years. We see 6,000 to 10,000 companies every day coming through our APIs from all over the world, right? But so that means we see all kinds of potential complexities in companies coming in. And over time, we're training our models based on feedback from the mobile operators. So if we see something that the model is flagging as potentially risky, but it's not an exact thing that's been seen before, then we're actually engaging the mobile operators, because the history we've got for 20 years is we've had to produce evidence to protect the mobile operators when things go south, that they were doing due diligence, and we show the evidence that they did that. But at the same time, their legal teams need to feel that the decisioning that's being made by our models will support them in a legal or regulatory action. So we're making sure, that anything unique pops up, we are actually engaging for resolution. We had an RCS campaign come in with a banner where it was a young lady in a negligee with a cigarette burning in an ashtray, and she was saying, "Come in," and sitting in a boudoir, I guess you would say. And so it threw off all of our scanning technology to say there's something here that's age gated, for example. So we had to engage the carriers to see if it was something that we should, push through, depending on, could be kids seeing this stuff. Is that okay in this market? They approved it. It got through, but we trained the model. So anyway,
John, question here.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Hi. You just gave an example of a debt collecting company who was committing some form of illegal activity in the past.
Well, they were fined for their behavior.
Yeah. Do you think that there are some industries who might be inherently more susceptible to committing fraud in the RBM sector? And if so, are there any measures which can be taken against this group collectively?
So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's an industry. I mean, obviously, we see a lot of banking related fraud, right? But I wouldn't necessarily say that I could classify a company based on its industry as being, wrong. What we do actually do in some cases, though, is we look at the use case and we evaluate the use case that's going to run on whatever channel it is. And then we look at the industry that the company's in and say, does this use case make sense? Am I not answering your question?
No, that's perfectly good. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think just on that, though, I think what you will find is that, there are obviously a list of industries, a list of areas which, for instance, wouldn't be allowed to put a campaign through anyway because of the nature of their business. But that can also be dependent upon country or region. So that, again, is where, a verification, whether it's us, whether it's another party, whether a verification authority would be working with the likes of yourselves and any other carriers and Google and whoever else to be able to make sure that the policies work well. Because as an example, when it comes to our scoring mechanisms, we don't actually, we don't directly define all of those scoring pieces, we do that working with the lawyers and the
At the mobile
necessary
operators.
people within the mobile
Yeah.
operators,
Yeah.
because it's your networks. These are your networks. These are you are the people. And this is the thing about RCS for business. And this is one of the benefits where you have the double lock. That double lock is you have your verification authority representing yourselves in the marketplace, but ultimately it's your network to make the decision upon whether you accept a campaign or not. And that's one of the key pieces. And John's scenario here in terms of, Fredericks of Hollywood, who it was, the lingerie
That's who it
company,
was.
massive, but those are the Victoria's Secret. You want those brands.
Yeah.
They are the brand you want because they're going to be brilliant to have an engagement with and to drive business with. But you've got to be able to have the models in place first from a brand recognition and an image rights protection to avoid others who aren't those trying to get in the door.
Yeah, part of it was there was a cigarette burning in an ashtray too, in that image, right? Is that appropriate for educating? Anyway, so I kind of jumped into logo and banner verification, but we call those assets. But so anyway, so there's the, do you legally exist? Are you who you say you are? And then we can go beyond that and look at your behavioral history. In your years in business and your company size and your industry, all of that can be looked at. And in the worst cases, if the lawyers of the mobile operators want us to really dig deep based on what we found, we have licenses to look at people. So we can look at the key employees and drill in. There's no APIs available for people level data. So my investigators have to go do the deep dives. But we can also look at all the related companies and ownership structure and go as deep as we need to go. But at some point, the API data is no longer available. So instead of 14 seconds to do everything, it's hours, because I'm going to do about 40 background checks for a single company. So anyway, logos and banners, or we call them the assets of the company. Couple of things, right? I mentioned earlier, not every logo or banner is a registered trademark. We are searching globally for all of the trademark databases in the world. But on other instances, we're searching for common law. So in other words, this logo is not registered. The Aegis logo that was here earlier is not a registered logo. Is it infringing on a registered logo anywhere in the world? So we had an instance where we had a small one-person consulting company submit a logo. It was a blue circle with a couple of letters in it, and it tied to a registered logo in the UK to a trash company. And they had it registered up through 2035. So obviously we had to raise it, push it back to the mobile operators and say, we got a 99% hit on this, right? Wasn't 100% the same, but it's close enough. If that had been a red circle with white cursive language that looked like the Coca-Cola logo, Coca-Cola would be suing the carriers for allowing that, right? So we call those the assets. We also do phone number verifications if needed, right? Can we tie that phone number to the rights to use to the company? Those are all assets depending on the channel. But logo and banner, we'll also have to search it for viruses. We have to search it for size. There was some discussion about changing from circle to square or square to circle, but we're scanning it in dozens of different ways, but also analyzing the content. We're looking for language. We're looking for any links. We're looking for QR codes. And everything about what's in that logo or banner is called out in our scanning technologies. And then, on top of that, are we verifying its right to use based on a common law globally, or are we verifying that on it's a registered trademark? And it cannot infringe on any other registered trademark. Why? Because they're going to come after the mobile operators.
Yeah.
If it does. So the next is the RCS agent verification. So that's oftentimes if we're looking at the use case. And then we issue credentials. So we have tokens that are created. The tokens have a payload. It's open encrypted, closed encrypted. Companies like Apple can see it. They can ping it against our open key and verify that it's legitimate. But these tokens can also be presented into other channels and verified. So it's basically the brand can reuse them. And we've structured it to handle that. Let's jump to the next one real quick. So this is a map of 5.3 million, as of last month, 5.3 million business entities globally that we have processed through our vetting platform. This is where they're from. Each dot represents a city, a province, a territory. And each dot represents multiple business entities. And so literally, we've been able to cover the globe in terms of making sure that these companies either legally exist, they are who they say they are, and or have no behavioral problems in their history. So do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and obviously, John's spoken about this earlier about the closed loop. It is about, it's helping you think about how you're going to look at your life cycle management processes, because it's what we do. You need to look at the life cycle auditing of organizations and their partners. It's helping you make the decisions about what makes a good partner. It's helping you think about the approaches to risk. Most important, and this is one of the pieces that Mariola and Simon highlighted, is the importance of having the right onboarding, an effective onboarding and verification process for your markets. And that's the thing about the benefits of carriers talking with each other, working internally as organizations, but across the carriers to actually work out what works for your respective markets that will make RCS for Business a success. I think that's the thing that, that we're involved with in the marketplace with the GSMA as part of the ecosystem. And it's what Google are doing. It's what Google, it's what Apple are doing. People are working together.
Yeah. So let me add one thing. So the other thing is, as a verification authority, we are completely neutral. We're paid to find problems. We have nothing to do with the revenue generated by originating or terminating calls or messages, right? So we are paid to find problems, and that's all we do. No way associated with any of the traffic. So that's really important. The second thing that we also realize, though, is that we have to be efficient. We have to provide good customer service, and we have to have a price that makes sense, because if we charge too much, we're pushing people to other channels and we're out of business, right? So we want to get the right balance. We want to create high efficiency so the customer experience is good. We want some friction so the bad actors have a hard time getting in, right? But we have to continue to operate at a balance. And that's something we've learned over our 20 years in this industry.